My teacher called me a liar when I said my dad works at NASA. What happened at parents' night left her speechless. I've always been the quiet one, the girl who sits in the back of the classroom doodling in the margins of her notebook while everyone else laughs and talks. It's not that I don't like people. I just don't know how to be loud like them. Maybe it's because we moved to this town 6 months ago, and I still feel like an outsider. Or maybe it's because my dad's job makes it hard to explain who I am without sounding like I'm showing off. My dad works at NASA. I know, it sounds like something a kid would make up, but it's true. He's a lead engineer on the Artemis program, the one trying to get humans back to the moon. He doesn't wear a spacesuit or fly rockets, but he's one of the people who makes it all possible. He's always told me not to talk about his work too much, partly because some of it's classified, and partly because he doesn't like drawing attention to himself, so I don't. Until that day in science class. Ms. Dalton, our teacher, was going around the room asking everyone what their parents did for a living. It was supposed to be a lesson on careers in science, but it felt more like a way to make some kids feel small. When it was my turn, I hesitated. I could feel everyone's eyes on me, waiting. My dad works at NASA, I said quietly. The room erupted in laughter. Ms. Dalton crossed her arms and gave me this look, like I'd just told the dumbest joke she'd ever heard. Everly, we're discussing real careers. There's no need to make things up. My face burned. But it's true. She cut me off. Then maybe he's a janitor at NASA. The class laughed even harder. I clenched my fists under my desk, my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to argue, to tell her she was wrong, but I knew it wouldn't matter. No one would believe me. At lunch, the teasing didn't stop. So, your dad flies rockets? Can he take us to the moon? One kid said, smirking. Another chimed in. Maybe he's an alien, that's why she's so weird. I tried to ignore them, but the nickname NASA girl followed me everywhere. By the time I got home, I felt like I'd been carrying a weight in my chest all day. My older brother Tristan was in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone. He took one look at me and knew something was wrong. What happened? He asked. I told him everything. How Ms. Dalton had called me a liar, how the kids had laughed, how I just sat there too embarrassed to defend myself. Tristan's face darkened. She called you a liar? In front of everyone? I nodded, my throat tight. Dad needs to hear about this, he said, standing up. But I shook my head. No, I don't want to cause trouble. Tristan sighed. Fine. But you know what? Parent-teacher night is in 2 days. Let's see if Ms. Dalton still has something to say then. I didn't know if that was a good idea or not, but I didn't argue. 2 days later, the evening arrived. My dad came home early from work, still in his button-up shirt and jeans. He didn't wear his NASA badge or anything, but he had this way of carrying himself that made people notice him. My mom, on the other hand, was all business. She'd printed out his work ID and tucked it into her purse, just in case. As we walked into the classroom, my stomach twisted into knots. Ms. Dalton was chatting with a group of parents, but the moment she saw us, her smile faltered. My dad stepped forward, extending his hand. Good evening, Ms. Dalton. I'm Dr. Kellen Mitchell, Everly's father. Her face went pale. Ms. Dalton forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ah, nice to meet you. My mom, standing beside me, didn't waste any time. She pulled out her phone and showed Ms. Dalton the screen. It was a picture of my dad's NASA ID badge, complete with the logo and his title, Lead Engineer, Artemis Program. My husband leads research for the Artemis program, my mom said, her voice calm but firm. You might have heard of it. Ms. Dalton blinked rapidly, her face turning a shade of red I'd never seen before. I didn't realize, but my dad wasn't done. He stepped closer, his voice low but steady. I heard you called my daughter a liar. The room seemed to freeze. Other parents turned to watch, their conversations fading into silence. Ms. Dalton stammered. I only meant it sounded unbelievable. I assumed she was exaggerating. My dad didn't break eye contact. So, you humiliated a student for telling the truth? The tension in the room was so thick I could barely breathe. I glanced at Tristan, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Ms. Dalton tried to laugh it off, but it came out strained. It was just a misunderstanding. Tristan didn't let her off the hook. A misunderstanding where you accused my sister of lying and insulted our dad's work? The silence that followed was deafening. Then, a father from another student spoke up. You know, Ms. Dalton, this isn't the first time I've heard about you dismissing students unfairly. Other parents murmured in agreement, their voices rising like a wave. Ms. Dalton looked like a deer caught in headlights. I think we should move on to discussing grades, but my dad wasn't having it. He leaned slightly forward, his voice calm but cutting. Let's not, because I also heard you implied I'm a janitor. Her face turned beet red. I was joking. My mom, who had been quiet until now, stepped in. Do you always joke at the expense of students? The murmuring around the room grew louder. Ms. Dalton stammered, struggling to regain control, but it was too late. The damage was done. By the next day, something had changed. Ms. Dalton was suddenly very polite in class. She didn't call on me anymore, didn't even look at me. The other kids, sensing something had happened, stopped teasing me. It was like the air had shifted, and I wasn't sure if I should feel relieved or more anxious. Then, the principal called me into the office. I expected trouble. Maybe Ms. Dalton had complained about my parents, or maybe I was in trouble for something I didn't even do. But when I walked in, the principal sighed and gestured for me to sit down. Everly, I want to personally apologize, she said, her tone sincere. Your teacher has been spoken to about her behavior. I blinked, unsure how to respond. That's it? The principal hesitated, then leaned forward. Let's just say, you're not the only student she's had complaints about. A week later, Ms. Dalton was reassigned to a different school. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel like like I'd won anything, but for the first time, I felt heard. Life at school settled into a strange new normal. The teasing stopped and the whispers faded, but something still felt off. I wasn't used to being noticed, and now it felt like everyone was watching me, waiting for me to do something extraordinary. Like being the daughter of a NASA engineer meant I was supposed to be some kind of genius or hero. I wasn't. I was just me, Everly, the quiet girl who liked to draw and read sci-fi novels. But suddenly, that wasn't enough. One afternoon, as I was packing up my things after school, a group of kids approached me. They weren't the ones who had teased me before. These were the smart kids, the ones who always raised their hands in class and got perfect grades. "Hey, Everly," one of them said. A boy named Caleb. "Is it true your dad works at NASA?" I hesitated, then nodded. "That's so cool." A girl named Priya chimed in. "Do you, know stuff about space? Could you help us with the science project?" I blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. Maybe? They exchanged excited glances, and suddenly, I was part of their group. It should have felt nice, being included for once, but it didn't. It felt like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. At home, I tried to talk to Tristan about it. He was busy with college applications, but he always made time for me. "They're only talking to me because of Dad," I said, flopping down on his bed. "It's like I'm not even a person to them, I'm just NASA girl." Tristan looked up from his laptop. "So, use it." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "If they think you're cool because of Dad, let them. You don't owe them anything. Just be yourself. And if they stick around, great. If not, who cares?" I wanted to believe him, but it wasn't that simple. A few days later, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the cafeteria, picking at my lunch, when Caleb slid into the seat across from me. "Hey, Everly, we were thinking, what if we did our science project on the Artemis program? You could, ask your dad for info or something?" I froze. I don't know if he can share that kind of stuff." Caleb waved his hand dismissively. "It's fine. Just ask him. It's not like it's top secret or anything, right?" I didn't know how to explain that it was top secret, that my dad had spent years working on things he couldn't even tell us about. But Caleb didn't wait for an answer. "Cool. We'll meet after school tomorrow to start planning," he said, then got up and left. I sat there, my stomach churning. I didn't want to ask my dad for help. He was already stressed. Enough with work, and I didn't want to bother him. But I also didn't want to let my group down. That night, I finally worked up the courage to talk to him. He was in his home office, staring at his computer screen with a furrowed brow. I knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Dad?" He looked up, his expression softening when he saw me. "Hey, kiddo. What's up?" I hesitated, then stepped inside. I need your help with something." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh, what's going on?" I explained the science project, trying to make it sound like no big deal. But when I mentioned the Artemis program, his face went serious. "Everly, you know I can't share details about my work," he said gently. I nodded, feeling my cheeks burn. "I know. I didn't know what to tell them." He sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Tell them the truth, that you're proud of what I do, but it's not something you can talk about. If they're really your friends, they'll understand." I wanted to believe him, but I wasn't so sure. The next day, I told Caleb and the others what my dad had said. Caleb frowned. "So, you're not gonna help us?" "I am helping," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just can't give you classified information." Priya rolled her eyes. "Whatever. We'll figure it out ourselves." And just like that, I was back to being invisible. The science project came and went. Caleb's group ended up doing something about renewable energy, and I joined a different group that was studying ecosystems. It was fine, but it didn't feel like mine. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed an opportunity, not just to impress my classmates, but to prove something to myself. A few weeks later, something happened that changed everything. I was sitting in my room, sketching in my notebook, when my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. I almost ignored it. I didn't get many emails, and most of them were spam, but something made me open it. The subject line read, "Would you like to visit NASA?" I stared at the screen, my heart pounding. The email was from someone named Dr. Elena Martinez, who introduced herself as part of NASA's outreach team. She explained that they'd heard about what happened with Ms. Dalton and wanted to invite me to tour the facility, meet some astronauts, and see the work my dad was doing on the Artemis program. I read the email 3 times before it fully sank in. Ran downstairs where my dad was sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee and scrolling through his phone. "Dad," I said, holding out my phone, "look at this." He took the phone, his eyes scanning the screen. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he smiled. "Well, that's something," he said, handing the phone back to me. "Can I go?" I asked, trying not to sound too desperate. He chuckled. "Of course you can go. It's not every day you get an invitation like that." I texted Tristan immediately. "Guess what? My fake NASA dad just got me into a VIP tour." His reply came a few seconds later. Now that's poetic justice. The next day at school, I couldn't keep it to myself. I told a few people about the invitation, and by lunchtime, the whole school knew. "Hey, Everly," Caleb said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Is it true you're going to NASA?" I nodded, trying to act casual. "That's so cool," Priya said, her tone softer than usual. "Can you, take pictures or something?" "I'll try," I said, though I wasn't sure if I'd be allowed to. For the first time, it felt like they were seeing me, not just as NASA girl, but as someone who had something to offer. The day of the tour arrived, and my dad took the day off work to go with me. We drove to the facility, and as we pulled into the parking lot, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Dr. Martinez met us at the entrance. She was tall and friendly, with a warm smile that put me at ease. Hayes. Welcome, Everly, she said, shaking my hand. We're so glad you could come. The tour was incredible. We saw labs filled with cutting-edge technology, met engineers who were working on the Artemis program, and even got to sit in a mock-up of the Orion spacecraft. But the best part was meeting an astronaut. Her name was Commander Rachel Hayes, and she was one of the astronauts training for the Artemis missions. She talked about what it was like to live in space, how she'd always dreamed of being an astronaut, and how important it was to never give up on your dreams. You never know where life will take you, she said, looking directly at me. Just keep reaching for the stars. I felt a lump in my throat. For the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not because of who my dad was, but because of who I could be. As we left the facility, my dad put his arm around my shoulders. So what did you think? He asked. I smiled. It was amazing. He nodded. You know, you could do this someday, if you want to. I looked up at him surprised. You think so? He smiled. I know so. The ride home was quiet, but in a good way. I was still processing everything I'd seen and heard. Commander Hayes' words kept replaying in my mind. Just keep reaching for the stars. When we got home, Tristan was waiting for us. So? He asked, leaning against the doorway. How was it? I grinned. It was incredible. I met an astronaut, saw the Orion spacecraft, and okay, he said, holding up his hands. I get it. You're officially cooler than me now. I laughed, but deep down, I felt a spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The next day at school, I walked in with my head held a little higher. The whispers followed me, but this time, they were different. Hey, did you hear? Everly actually got invited to NASA. She wasn't lying. She's gonna meet astronauts. I didn't say much, but I didn't need to. For the first time, I felt like I didn't have to prove anything to anyone. A few days later, I got another email from Dr. Martinez. This one was an invitation to participate in a summer program for students interested in STEM. It was a competitive program, and only a handful of students from across the country were selected. I showed the email to my dad, who read it carefully before looking up at me. This is a big opportunity, he said. What do you think? I hesitated. I don't know. I mean, I'm not even sure if I'm good enough, he smiled. You're more than good enough, Everly, but it's up to you. I thought about it for a few days before finally deciding to apply. The application process was intense. Essays, recommendations, even a video interview, but I poured everything I had into it. And when I hit submit, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. Weeks passed, and I tried not to think about it too much. But one afternoon, as I was sitting in my room, my phone buzzed with another email notification. My heart raced as I opened it. Dear Everly, congratulations. You've been selected to participate in the NASA STEM summer program. I couldn't read the rest. I jumped up and ran downstairs where my dad was working on his laptop. Dad, I said, holding out my phone. I got in. He read the email, then looked up at me with a proud smile. I knew you would. Tristan, who had been eavesdropping from the hallway, came in and ruffled my hair. Looks like NASA girl is officially a thing now. I laughed. But inside, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was my chance to prove myself, not just to my classmates, but to myself. The summer program was everything I'd hoped for and more. I met students from all over the country who shared my passion for science and space. We worked on projects, attended lectures, and even got to tour more of the NASA facilities. But the best part was the final project. Each student had to present a research idea to a panel of NASA scientists. I decided to focus on something my dad had mentioned once, a problem with the communication systems on the Artemis spacecraft. I spent weeks researching, running simulations, and fine-tuning my presentation. When the day finally came, I was nervous but ready. As I stood in front of the panel, I took a deep breath and began. My project focuses on improving the communication systems for the Artemis missions. The room was silent as I presented my research. I could feel the weight of the scientists' eyes on me, but I kept going, explaining my ideas and the simulations I'd run. When I finished, there was a moment of silence before the panel started, asking questions. At first, I was nervous, but as I answered, I realized something. I knew what I was talking about. All those hours of research and preparation had paid off. When the Q&A ended, one of the scientists, a woman with silver hair and a kind smile, leaned forward. Everly, this is impressive work, she said. Have you considered pursuing a career in aerospace engineering? I blinked, caught off guard. I haven't really thought about it, she smiled. Well, you should. You have a natural talent for this. Her words stayed with me long after the presentation was over. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't just the quiet girl in the back of the classroom. I was someone who could make a difference. The program ended with a ceremony where each student received a certificate of completion. As I stood on stage holding mine, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. When I got home, my dad and Tristan were waiting for me. So, Tristan asked, how was it? I smiled. It was amazing. I think I want to do this. Like, for real. My dad nodded, his expression serious but proud. Then you will. The rest of the summer flew by. I spent my days reading about aerospace engineering, working on small projects, and even shadowing my dad at work a few times. It was hard, but it was also exciting. For the first time, I felt like I had a direction. When school started again, I walked in with a new confidence. The whispers were still there, but they didn't bother me anymore. I wasn't just NASA girl, I was Everly, the girl who had stood in front of a panel of NASA scientists and held her own. One day, Caleb approached me after class. Hey, Everly, he said, his tone hesitant. I was wondering, do you want to work on the science fair project together this year? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure, he smiled, looking relieved. cool. I was thinking we could do something with space technology. Maybe something like what you worked on over the summer. I agreed, and as we started planning, I realized something. This was my chance to share what I'd learned, not just with Caleb, but with everyone. The science fair was a few months away, but I threw myself into the project. We decided to focus on improving communication systems for small satellites, something I'd learned about during the summer program. As the fair approached, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was my chance to prove myself, not just to my classmates, but to myself. The day of the fair arrived, and I stood in front of our project, waiting for the judges to come by. Caleb was next to me, looking nervous but excited. When the judges finally arrived, I took a deep breath and began my presentation. Our project focuses on improving communication systems for small satellites. The judges listened intently as I explained our project. I talked about the challenges of satellite communication, the solutions we'd proposed, and the simulations we'd run to test our ideas. Caleb chimed in occasionally, adding details about the technical aspects, but for the most part, I led the presentation. When I finished, the judges asked a few questions, but they were nothing compared to the grilling I'd gotten at NASA. I answered confidently, and by the time they moved on to the next project, I felt like we'd done our best. The rest of the fair was a blur. I wandered around looking at the other projects, but my mind kept drifting back to ours. Had we done enough? Would it stand out? Finally, the awards ceremony began. Caleb and I sat together, nervously waiting for the results. When they announced the winners, I wasn't expecting much. There were so many great projects, and ours was just one of them. But then they called our names. First place goes to Everly Mitchell and Caleb Thompson for their project on improving satellite communication systems. I froze, my heart pounding. Caleb grabbed my arm, grinning from ear to ear. "We won," he said, pulling me to my feet. I followed him to the stage in a daze, barely aware of the applause around me. As I accepted the trophy, I felt a surge of pride, not just for winning, but for everything I'd overcome to get here. After the ceremony, Caleb turned to me, still grinning. "We should celebrate," he said. "Maybe we could grab pizza or something." I hesitated, then nodded. "Sure." As we walked to the pizza place, I realized something. This was the first time I'd hung out with Caleb outside of school. It felt nice. Over pizza, we talked about the project, the fair, and what we wanted to do next. Caleb mentioned wanting to study engineering in college, and for the first time, I felt like I could see a future where we were more than just classmates. When I got home that night, my dad and Tristan were waiting for me. "So?" Tristan asked. "How'd it go?" I held up the trophy, grinning. "We won." My dad smiled, his eyes shining with pride. "I knew you would." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of congratulations and recognition. People who had never spoken to me before suddenly wanted to know about the project, about NASA, about my plans for the future. But the best part was the email I got a few days later. It was from Dr. Martinez. "Dear Everly, I heard about your science. Fair win. Congratulations. Your project sounds fascinating, and I'd love to discuss it further. Would you be interested in presenting your findings at a NASA outreach event next month?" I stared at the screen, my heart racing. This was it, my chance to share my work with the world. I replied immediately, saying yes. The weeks leading up to the NASA outreach event were a blur of preparation. I spent hours refining my presentation, running through it with my dad, and even practicing in front of Tristan, who offered surprisingly helpful feedback. "You've got this," he said after one of our practice sessions. "Just don't forget to breathe." I laughed, but his words stuck with me. The day of the event arrived, and my dad drove me to the facility. As we pulled into the parking lot, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was my chance to share my work with people who could actually make a difference. Dr. Martinez met us at the entrance, her warm smile putting me at ease. "Everly, I'm so glad you could make it," she said, shaking my hand. "We're all looking forward to your presentation." The event was held in a large auditorium filled with scientists, engineers, and students. As I stood backstage waiting for my turn, I took deep breaths, trying to calm my nerves. Finally, it was time. I walked onto the stage, the spotlight blinding me for a moment. But as I looked out at the audience, I saw my dad sitting in the front row, his expression proud and encouraging. I took a deep breath and began. "Thank you for having me here today. My name is Everly Mitchell, and I'm here to talk about improving communication systems for small satellites." The presentation went better than I could have hoped. I explained our project, the challenges we'd faced, and the solutions we'd proposed. The audience listened intently, and when I finished, there was a moment of silence before the room erupted in applause. Afterwards, several people came up to me asking questions and offering feedback. One of them was a man in a suit who introduced himself as Dr. Patel, a senior engineer at NASA. "Everly, your work is impressive," he said. "Have you considered applying for an internship here?" I blinked, caught off guard. I hadn't thought about it. He smiled. "Well, you should. We're always looking for talented young minds like yours." His words stayed with me long after the event was over. For the first time, I allowed myself to imagine a future where I wasn't just a student. I was a part of something bigger. When I got home that night, Tristan was waiting for me. "So?" he asked. "How'd it go?" I smiled. "It was amazing. They offered me an internship." His eyes widened. "Seriously? That's huge." I nodded, still processing it myself. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of applications and interviews. When I finally got the acceptance letter, I felt a mix of excitement and nerves. This was it, my chance to prove myself, not just to my classmates, but to the world. The internship at NASA was everything I'd hoped for, and more. I worked alongside some of the brightest minds in the field, contributing to real projects and learning more than I ever could in a classroom. But the best part was the sense of belonging. For the first time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One afternoon, as I was working on a simulation, Dr. Patel stopped by my desk. "Everly, do you have a minute?" he asked. I nodded, following him to a small conference room. Inside, a group of engineers was gathered around a table, discussing a problem with the Artemis program. "We've hit a snag with the communication systems," Dr. Patel explained. "We thought you might have some ideas." I hesitated, then stepped forward. "Actually, I've been working on something that might help." I explained my idea, drawing on the research I'd done for the science fair and the summer program. The engineers listened intently, asking questions and offering suggestions. By the end of the meeting, they'd decided to implement my solution. As I walked back to my desk, I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. That night, I called Tristan to tell him what had happened. "So, you're basically saving NASA now?" he joked. I laughed. "Not exactly, but it feels good to contribute." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm proud of you, you know." His words meant more to me than he realized. The internship ended with a presentation to the entire team. As I stood in front of the room, explaining my work and the impact it had, I felt a sense of pride I hadn't felt in a long time. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Dr. Patel stood up, smiling. "Everly, you've done incredible work here. We'd love to have you back next summer if you're interested." I nodded, my heart racing. "I'd love to." As I left the facility that day, I felt a mix of emotions: excitement for the future, gratitude for the opportunity, and a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in a long time. When I got home, my dad was waiting for me. "So?" he asked. "How'd it go?" I smiled. "They asked me to come back next summer." He nodded, his expression proud. I knew they would. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. From being called a liar in class to standing in front of a room full of NASA engineers, it had been a journey I never could have imagined. But the best part was realizing that I didn't have to be someone else to succeed. I just had to be myself. As I drifted off to sleep, I thought about Commander Hayes' words, "Just keep reaching for the stars." And for the first time, I felt like I was the end.